Welcome to the future.
My name is Emily Moorhouse. I'm organizing for a future without sexual violence.
One of my old teachers used to tell his students something I now like to tell mine. A lot of you are smarter than me. As students, we would always laugh because we weren't used to hearing this. We were used to things like stand up straight, take your hat off, spit your gum out. But our teacher always reminded us that we all had incredible potential and that what we do has an impact in the world, even if we don't realize it yet. We're seeing this come true today. Youth around the globe are amazing us in their political mobilization, and a lot of their work is done through social media. Locally, we've seen things like We the Students Do Not Consent and the March for Education, where students are standing up to governments. Globally, we've seen the Fridays for Future hashtags and climate strikes, organized by young people like Autumn Pelletier, who's a water protector, and Greta Thunberg. This is all very exciting to me, both as a human living in a politically charged moment, but also as a researcher who studies creative media and sexual violence prevention. Now you might be thinking, what are the connections between these two things? We all know that sexual violence is a global problem. We also know that the media regularly reproduces violence and oppressive stereotypes. What we know less about is how to actually prevent sexual violence in our own communities. What kind of programs and tools will work and where? Because not all programs are transferable around the globe. More importantly, when they're not working, we have to ask, why? A big part of answering this question is relatability. A lot of the public school education programs around sex, consent, and relationships aren't relatable. Take my health class, for example. My health teacher walked up to the front of the room, she pulled out a condom, and she looked at us, and she said, "Don't trust anyone that says that they won't wear one of these because it doesn't fit." She then proceeded to open it and shove her entire forearm into the condom and held it up and was like, "See? It fits." You can laugh, it's okay. It was awkward then, and it's kind of awkward now. But beyond all the giggles that we had, it got me thinking. Wasn't something else missing from this conversation? What about all of those moments that lead up to before you actually want to have sex? Would I want to be with a partner that would lie to me? How would I know what good qualities to look for in a partner? How would I know that I'm being a good partner? How do I know what to say? If we're not having these conversations in school, where are we supposed to learn about these things from? As a researcher, I can tell you that. Young people living in North America today regularly cite mass media and pop culture as the main places they learn about sex, relationships, and consent. We definitely learn things from our family. We know this from psychology. And we learn things in schools. I never forgot that lesson. But let's do a quick poll here in the room. Where do you think you actually learned better? Did you learn more in school? Or did you learn more in the media, in pop culture? Maybe your favorite TV shows, music videos. So hands up for me, who thinks they actually learn more from media? Okay. So as a researcher, this is interesting to me for 3 reasons. The first is that most of the media messages you receive are inaccurate, they're unhealthy, or they're reproducing those violent stereotypes we're critical of in other situations. The second interesting thing comes from media psychology. Media psychologists have actually found that creativity, doing something creative, can get us to change our attitudes and behaviors. But violence prevention and consent programs don't often have a creativity component. This is an underdeveloped area of work. The third interesting thing is the political moment that we're living in. We're living in the era of the Me Too movement. So as many of you may know, it was founded by the grassroots activist Toronto Burke. And it had a lot of people getting really brave. They came online and they shared the hashtag #MeToo. And they talked about a story of sexual violence. So what this did was it obviously mapped the larger problem for us. But it did something else. It also connected us. It let frontline workers and survivors know that we're not alone. When people ask me how I feel about the Me Too movement, or they ask me about my anti-violence work, a lot of people tell me that they're overwhelmed. I hear things like, Emily, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say, so I'm not going to do anything. When I push people and tell them that we all have a responsibility, we all have something to contribute to this movement, sometimes people ask me a problematic question. They ask me whether I'm passionate about this because of my story. I'm not here to talk about that story. I'm here to talk about solutions. I believe that the solutions involve young people in the movement, and they involve using media. Together with young people, we can make media, star maps, constellations to guide us into a brighter future free from sexual and gender-based violence. We can literally make our own media and map what the brighter future is going to look like, what it's going to sound like, and what it's going to feel like. So you might say it's just a fancy metaphor, but I'm actually testing this in my ongoing doctoral work. I explore whether media literacy approaches can enhance the way that young people learn about sex, consent, and relationships. So what is media literacy? Media literacy is an approach that teaches critical analysis of media messages. Rather than just assuming that what we're consuming is true, we learn to analyze the connections to things like profit, power, privilege, and stereotypes. So beyond using media to actually analyze the world around us, we actually try to make our own media. This is really empowering. How many of you in here feel represented by Hollywood? I don't. I don't see everyday people that look like the people in this room. When I see media, I want to see my families represented, my communities. I want to see people that look like people in Scarborough, immigrant families, queer families. We want to see Indigenous love, people with disabilities in love, a diversity of representations. And we can do this when we make our own media. So you might say, okay, media's cool. What does this have to do with violence prevention? As a researcher, I know that the media literacy approaches align with best practices in violence prevention programs. This is because we take what's called an ecological approach. This is just a fancy way for saying we target the problems at multiple levels. So we can look at individual problems, problems in ourselves, relationship problems and those dynamics that aren't working. But most importantly, we analyze structural violence, things that actually uphold violence and justify it in our society. In the Canadian context, we have to talk about colonization. We have to talk about the historical and ongoing colonization, things like residential schools, churches and religious organizations hiding perpetrators of violence, institutional violence, and this happens everywhere from Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood to right here in academia, and it needs to stop. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to educate young people. We're going to involve them in our movement. We'll be introducing them to media literacy and teaching them consent at a young age. This is how we change culture. This is how we build consent into the very fabric of our culture. So what do I mean when I say consent? The folks at Planned Parenthood have come up with a really great acronym to teach young people the basics, which is FRIES. Everybody loves fries. You're smiling. Consent must first be F, freely given, so there's no pressure or threats. I wouldn't, for example, say, I'm going to leave you if you don't have sex with me. I'm going to tell everyone all these bad things about you. That's not being in a good relationship. Consent is also reversible or revocable. You can stop what you're doing at any time. It doesn't matter who started what. Consent also needs to be I-informed. You need to know what you're doing. You're conscious. You're not drunk. You're not high. You know what's going on. Consent is also E-enthusiastic. So this is communicated both verbally and non-verbally. It's not just the yes coming out of your mouth, it's the body language. Are you and your partner both wanting to engage in what you're doing? So if somebody says yes and they're crying, your partner's probably not okay and you should check in. If somebody is saying okay but awkwardly moving away from you, that's not consensual. Consent also needs to be S, specific, so you know what you're agreeing to. For example, if somebody agrees to go on a date with you, it doesn't necessarily mean they want to have sex with you. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but checking in and communicating and negotiating what those wants are is really important. For young people, the Netflix and chill moments. Agreeing to go over and watch a Netflix movie is not the same thing as consenting to sex. And I'm glad that you're smiling because it means you know what I'm talking about. So to teach all of this, I developed a program for young learners in Toronto to teach them about consent in media. So we'll start the discussion with peer-led definitions, asking people, what does consent mean to you? What does that look like? Getting young people to lead the discussion is a practice of consent in itself. Consent at its core is about communication and negotiation to come to a shared understanding. It also brings the lesson back to what I had mentioned earlier. Young people are really smart. Some of them don't need a teacher to stand up with awkward examples and give them a textbook-based lesson. They can actually lead discussions and co-teach their peers. Because media is a relevant way that we learn about relationships, we'll be introducing youth to media literacy. They'll be analyzing messages with those pop culture examples. This gives them positive models to look up to. We can look to our favorite characters and say, okay, that was a little shady, I wouldn't want to do that. Or we can say, I want to strive for those relationships, those models that I love so much. I hear a lot of, I want to strive for the Ross and Rachel, or I want to be Beth and Randall on This Is Us. We can also see what we wouldn't want ourselves or our friends to do. I wouldn't want to be Justin in 13 Reasons Why, because I know what happens with Bryce and Hannah. So following all the analysis of what's working and not, youth actually get to create their own media productions. We get to tell us stories in a way that matters to us most. And this is really empowering, because we get the diversity of representations that we need. How many of you in here are media makers? Put your hands up for me. Do you make YouTubes, blogs, radios, podcasts? Do you engage in social media? I know you love TikTok, which is also a form of social media. The point is, you are already using media, and this topic affects all of us. Relationships. We all have relationships. We all want to be in better relationships. So getting youth to start thinking about these things young is how we build a sustainable movement. What kind of models do we want moving forward? Reflect together. Are these things that we want to be looking up to? When I reflect on the theme of the conference, 2020 Vision, I think about what I want our future to look like. I think about what young people would want our future to look like, and actually spending time to map this through media is really powerful. Young people find media to be so powerful because it literally lets us move our vision into action. It also connects us across borders. We can start local in our communities supporting programs like this, but we can also expand out to connect across borders to create a better future. This is what gives me hope in our young people. And this is what gives me hope doing heavy anti-violence work. Thank you.